There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from having no one around, but from the certainty that no one will be able to accept you completely. Lucas lived with that loneliness. He wasn't rejected for who he was, but for what he carried. A body that should have been a source of pride became his greatest prison, until a woman walked into his workshop and saw in him something all the others had never been able to see. If this story touches your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Comment where you're listening from, and if you feel it was really worth it, consider becoming a member to get early access to upcoming stories. Your support makes all the difference. The workshop smelled of aged wood and fresh varnish, a scent Lucas had learned to love because it was the only one that didn't judge him. It was an honest smell, constant, safe. There among the tools hanging on the exposed brick walls and the boards stacked with reverence, he found the only place in the world where he could be exactly who he was. Or rather, where he could forget who he was. The afternoon light came through the high, dusty windows, creating golden beams that danced in the dust suspended in the air. Lucas was bent over the workbench, delicately adjusting the tuning pegs of a 1920s violin. His fingers, large, thick, full of calluses, moved with almost impossible precision. Each touch was calculated, gentle, reverent, as if he were touching something sacred, and he was. For Lucas, every instrument had a soul, had a story, had a voice that needed to be heard, and he was the only one who knew how to make it sing again. But his own voice, that had been silent for years. He didn't talk much, not because he had nothing to say, but because he'd learned early on that silence was safer. Words opened doors, and when doors opened, people saw, and when they saw and they ran. Lucas was 6'4", tall, broad shoulders, hands that seemed sculpted to hold the world, an angular face with lines marked by time and loneliness. He wasn't ugly, far from it. Women looked, they always looked, until they didn't anymore. Because Lucas carried something no one expected, something that should have been a source of pride, of envy, of admiration. But that had become his greatest curse. Since he was 16 when he had his first experience, Lucas realized he was different. Not just different, disproportionate. His anatomy was so out of the ordinary that it caused shock, fear, pain. Women didn't know how to handle it, neither did he. There were attempts. Of course there were. At 19, a girlfriend from high school. She tried, but the pain was so intense that she left the room crying, got dressed in a hurry, and never answered his messages again. At 23, a college classmate. She laughed. Not from happiness, but from nervousness, from disbelief, from disguised fear. "Sorry, Lucas, I can't, it's too much." At 27, a woman he met at a bar. She looked, swallowed hard, and said, "You need someone more prepared. I'm not." After that, he stopped trying, stopped going out, stopped opening doors, stopped believing that anyone could love him completely. Because how do you love someone who hurts you without meaning to? How do you accept a body that should bring pleasure, but only brings pain? Lucas convinced himself he was nature's mistake, a body designed for loneliness. And so, he made loneliness his home. The workshop became his refuge. Here he was respected, admired, sought after. Musicians, collectors, conservatory professors, they all came to him because they knew if an instrument was broken, Lucas could fix it. He had the gift of restoring what seemed lost. Ironic, he thought sometimes. He fixed broken things but couldn't fix himself. That Thursday afternoon, Lucas was carefully sanding the neck of a double bass when he heard the door chime ring. He raised his eyes but not his face. Light footsteps, hesitant. A delicate presence entering the workshop's dense space. "Excuse me?" The voice was soft, almost musical. It had a velvety texture, like a low cello note. Lucas wiped his hands on his leather apron and finally looked up, and something inside him stirred. She was petite, maybe 5'5", brown hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders. Dark eyes, deep, curious. She wore a beige coat and carried, with reverent care, a cello case. But it wasn't her beauty that struck him. It was the way she looked around, as if she were entering a cathedral, as if she knew this place was sacred. "Good afternoon," Lucas said, his voice rough from disuse. "Can I help you?" She smiled, a small, shy but genuine smile. "I hope so. I was told you're the best." Lucas felt his face heat up. He wasn't used to direct compliments. "Depends on the instrument," he replied, looking away. She approached the workbench and carefully opened the case. The cello that appeared was old, beautiful. The wood had the color of dark honey, with grain that told decades of stories. But there were cracks. The bridge was crooked, the strings worn. "It was my grandfather's," she said, her voice catching. "He played every night before bed. When he died, my grandmother gave it to me, but I didn't have the courage to play it. It's broken, and I don't want just anyone touching it." Lucas took the instrument with both hands as if holding a child. His fingers slid over the wood, feeling every imperfection, every memory etched there. "It has a beautiful soul," Lucas murmured, more to himself than to her. She blinked, surprised. You feel that too?" Lucas raised his eyes, and for the first time in years he allowed himself to really look at a woman. She didn't look away. She held his gaze and smiled. "I do," he admitted. "Every instrument has a voice. This one still wants to sing." There was a silence. But it wasn't empty. It was full of something neither of them could name yet. "How long will it take?" she asked, her voice soft. "A few weeks, maybe a month. I need to work slowly." "With respect?" She nodded. "Then I'll come back, every week if you don't mind. I want to follow along. I want to see it be reborn." Lucas felt his chest tighten. No one had ever asked to stay. "You can come whenever you want," he said, trying to sound casual, but his voice came out low, almost intimate. She extended her hand. "My name is Ada." He hesitated. Then he wrapped her hand with his, huge, rough, calloused. "Lucas." The touch lasted a second longer than it should have. And when she left, Lucas stood in the middle of the workshop, looking at the closed door, feeling something he hadn't felt in so long he almost didn't recognize it. Hope. Ada came back 3 days later. Lucas wasn't expecting her so soon. He'd said, every week, but she showed up on Tuesday when the morning sun was still struggling to break through the thin fog covering the city. He was preparing his tools to start work on the cello when he heard the door chime. His heart jumped before he even looked up. It was her. She wore a cream-colored wool blouse and a brown skirt that went to her knees. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, with some rebellious strands framing her face. She carried a paper bag in her hand. "Good morning," Ada said with that small, shy smile that seemed to light up the entire workshop. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Lucas wiped his hands on his apron instinctively, as if he needed to prepare himself for her presence. "No, of course not." He hesitated. "I thought you were coming next week." "I know," she admitted, shrugging with an almost childlike delicacy. "But I couldn't wait. I brought coffee. I thought you might... Well, everyone likes coffee, right?" She held out the bag. Inside, 2 paper cups still warm and a package of butter cookies. Lucas stood there for a moment, not knowing what to do. No one had ever brought him coffee. No one had ever cared enough to think of him outside this space. "Thank you," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. They sat on 2 high stools near the workbench. Ada observed everything with a quiet curiosity. The tools organized by size, the varnish jars lined up, the old sheet music hanging on the wall like paintings. "Do you live here?" she asked, blowing on her coffee before drinking. "In the back. There's a small room." Lucas took a sip. It was perfect, strong, lightly sweetened. "It's more practical. Sometimes I work late." "Did you always want to do this? Fix instruments?" He thought about the question. No one had ever asked about him, about what he wanted, about what he felt. "My father was a carpenter," Lucas began, turning the cup between his enormous hands. "He made furniture. But when I was a kid, he restored an antique piano for a client. I was fascinated. It wasn't just wood. It was imprisoned music waiting to come out." Ada smiled, and there was something deeply tender in that gesture. Imprisoned music. That's beautiful. Lucas felt his face heat up. He wasn't used to being seen like this, as someone who could say beautiful things. "And you?" he asked, trying to shift the focus. Have you always played the cello? Since I was 7. Her eyes shone with the memory. My grandfather used to say that the cello was the voice closest to the human soul. Not too high, not too low, just honest. He was right. They fell silent for a moment. But it wasn't awkward. It was as if they were both used to silences. As if they knew that sometimes what isn't said matters more than words. Can I see? Ada asked, pointing to the cello resting on a padded stand. Of course. She stood up and walked to the instrument. Lucas followed her, keeping a respectful distance but feeling a strange need to be close. Ada ran her fingers over the cracks in the wood with an almost reverent delicacy. Have you started already? Just the initial assessment. I need to open it carefully, see what's compromised inside. But the structure is solid, it'll sing again. She looked at Lucas, and there were tears in her eyes, but not from sadness, from gratitude. Thank you, she whispered, for treating it with so much care. Lucas didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. Ada turned back to the cello, but as she did, she lost her balance slightly. Lucas reacted on instinct. He reached out and held her arm, firm but gentle. The touch was electric. She looked at his hand on her arm. Then she raised her eyes and didn't let go. You have big hands, she said, her voice soft, almost admiring. Lucas froze. The old fear rose up his throat like bile. He released her arm immediately, as if he'd been burned. Sorry, he murmured, stepping back. Ada frowned, confused. Why? I don't mind. I think it's beautiful. Artist's hands. Lucas blinked. No one had ever said that. No one had ever looked at him and seen beauty. He couldn't finish the sentence. Ada took a step forward, closing the distance he'd created. Lucas, it's okay. I'm not afraid of you. The way she said it, calm, firm, true, made something inside him break. Just a little. Just a small crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. Most people are, he admitted, his voice low. Then most people are foolish. They stood there, still, just inches apart. Lucas could smell her scent, something soft, floral, with a hint of vanilla. He could hear her breathing, light and measured. He could see the small freckles on the bridge of her nose, the way her eyelashes trembled slightly. And she didn't look away. For the first time in years, Lucas felt seen. Not judged, not measured. Just seen. I should go, Ada said, but didn't move. You should, Lucas agreed. But he didn't move either. For a moment, a brief and perfect moment, the world hung in suspension, as if time had decided to pause, just for them. Then Ada smiled, small and mysterious, and finally stepped back. Can I come back tomorrow? She asked, walking backward toward the door, as if she didn't want to take her eyes off him. You can come whenever you want, Lucas repeated, and this time it sounded like a promise. She waved, opened the door, and left. Lucas stood in the middle of the workshop, his heart beating in a rhythm he didn't recognize. His fingers still tingled where they'd touched her arm. He looked at the cello. And for the first time he thought that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the only broken thing there that deserved to be fixed. Maybe he could be reborn too. Ada came back the next day, and the day after, and the day after that. What should have been a weekly visit turned into something daily, almost ritualistic. She always arrived in the morning, bringing coffee, sometimes fresh bread, other times just her smile, and that was enough to change the tone of Lucas's entire day. He didn't understand why she kept coming back. The cello was still in process. There was nothing new to show each day, but she came and stayed. And gradually, the workshop stopped being just his. It became theirs. In the first week, Ada sat on a small stool near the workbench and just watched. She didn't talk much, just watched Lucas work with that attentive, curious gaze, as if she were watching a conductor lead an invisible orchestra. And in a way, that's exactly what it was. Lucas disassembled, sanded, adjusted, glued. Each movement was precise, almost choreographed. He blew away wood dust, ran his fingers over the grain, tested the resistance with gentle pressure. All in silence. All with reverence. And Ada watched everything, as if he were the most fascinating thing in the world. She noticed things no one had ever noticed, The way he bit his lower lip slightly when he was concentrating, the way he tilted his head to the right side when examining a crack, the way his shoulders relaxed when he finally found the solution to a problem. "You're an artist," she said on a rainy Tuesday, while the sound of rain drummed on the zinc roof. Lucas looked up, surprised. "I'm a technician." "No," Ada shook her head, decided. "Technicians follow rules. You feel. Every piece you touch, every adjustment you make, you're hearing something no one else can hear." Lucas was quiet, because she was right, and because no one had ever understood that before. "My father said I was weird," he admitted, turning his eyes back to the cello. "Said I talked to dead wood like it was alive." "And it is," Ada replied softly. "Everything that's ever been loved stays alive somehow." He looked at her then. Really looked. And something passed between them, something dense, warm, inevitable. Lucas looked away first, but Ada smiled as if she knew exactly what he was feeling. In the second week, the conversations began, small at first. Comments about the weather, about music, about the city. But gradually the layers started peeling back. Ada told him about her grandfather, about how he played every night before bed, always the same piece, a Bach suite, about how her grandmother sat in the armchair beside him, knitting in silence but smiling, about how after he died the house became too quiet. "I couldn't play," she confessed, her voice catching. "Every time I picked up the bow, I heard his voice, and it hurt too much." Lucas stopped working. He wiped his hands and turned completely toward her. "And now?" he asked gently. "Now, I think I'm ready, because you're giving his voice back, and I want to hear it again." There were tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. Lucas felt his chest tighten. He wanted to say something, something comforting, something right, but words were never his strength. So instead, he did something he never did. He reached out his hand. Hedda looked at the enormous hand, calloused, stained with varnish, and without hesitating, she placed hers inside. The touch was soft, warm, safe. They stayed like that for a few seconds, just holding hands, breathing at the same rhythm. When Ada finally let go, there was something different in the air, something that didn't need to be said. In the third week, Ada started bringing books. She read aloud while Lucas worked. Poetry, short stories, passages from old novels. Her voice filled the workshop like music, soft and enveloping, transforming the space into something magical. Lucas discovered he loved listening to her, not just for the stories, but for the way she read, with emotion, with commitment, as if every word mattered. One day she read a poem about loneliness. Lucas stopped sanding the wood and just listened, his eyes fixed on his own hands. When she finished, there was silence. "Have you ever felt like this?" Ada asked, closing the book slowly. "Alone, even when you're surrounded by people?" Lucas swallowed hard. "Always." She tilted her head, studying his face with a tenderness that disarmed him. "Me too," she admitted. "Sometimes I play in rooms full of people, and I feel completely invisible." Lucas raised his eyes. "You're not invisible," he said, his voice low but firm. "Not to me." Ada caught her breath. For a moment it seemed like she was going to say something, but instead she just smiled, a small, vulnerable, real smile. "Neither are you," she whispered. It was on a Thursday near the end of the third week that everything changed. Ada was sitting near the window, reading a story about impossible loves. Lucas was beside her, adjusting the cello's bridge. The afternoon light came in soft, golden, creating an almost dreamlike atmosphere. In the middle of a sentence, Ada stopped reading. Lucas noticed the change immediately. He looked up. She was looking at him. Not at the book, at him. "Lucas?" "Yes? Can I ask you a question?" He nodded, tense. "Why do you pull away whenever I get close?" The question hit him like a punch. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Ada closed the book and turned completely toward him. "It's none of my business, I know, but I feel like there's something you're carrying, and I wanted you to know that. You don't have to carry it alone." Lucas felt his throat tighten. The old fear returned, dark and heavy. But there was something in her eyes, something that said, "I'm not going to run." He took a deep breath. "I'm not what you think I am," he said, his voice trembling. Ada frowned. "And what do you think I think you are?" "Someone normal." She took a step forward. "Lucas, I never wanted normal. I just wanted real." And then, without asking permission, without warning, Ada placed her hand on his face. Lucas froze. Her touch was soft, warm, impossible. "You are real," she whispered, "and that's all that matters." Lucas closed his eyes, because if he opened them she would see the tears, and for the first time in years he let someone touch him, let someone stay. Autumn arrived quietly, painting the city with shades of orange and gold. The leaves fell slowly, dancing in the wind before landing on the street in front of the workshop. And inside that small, cozy space, something else was falling too. The walls Lucas had built around himself. Ada was now part of his routine, not as a visitor, but as a constant, necessary, vital presence. She arrived every morning, always with something in her hands, coffee, bread, wildflowers she picked along the way, and always with that smile that lit up Lucas's entire day. He still didn't understand why she stayed. The cello was almost ready, only the final adjustments remained. But Ada didn't seem in a hurry to leave, and Lucas secretly hoped she never would. That Friday morning, the cold arrived early. The wind blew hard, making the workshop windows tremble slightly. Ada came in wrapped in a thick grey wool scarf, her cheeks flushed from the cold, her eyes shining. "It's freezing out there," she said, laughing as she quickly closed the door. "I think winter decided to arrive early." Lucas looked up from the workbench and smiled, a rare gesture, but one that was becoming more frequent lately. "There's a heater in the corner," he indicated with his head. "You can turn it on if you want." "Thanks." Ada took off her scarf and coat, revealing a dark red sweater that brought out her skin tone. She turned on the heater and rubbed her hands near the warmth. "I brought hot chocolate today. I thought it fit the weather better." She held up a thermos and 2 paper cups. Lucas felt something warm spread through his chest. It wasn't the heat from the heater. It was something else, something he couldn't name. But that made him feel alive. "You don't need to bring anything every time," he said, but his voice came out soft, almost grateful. "I know." Ada poured the chocolate and handed him a cup. "But I like to. It makes me feel like I'm giving back somehow." "Giving back for what?" She hesitated, holding the cup between her hands. "For letting me stay." Lucas blinked, confused. "I never asked you to leave." "I know. And that's why I stay." She smiled, but there was something vulnerable in that gesture. "Most people, they expect me to leave. Not to take up space, but you let me take up space." Lucas didn't know what to say, because he understood perfectly. He'd also spent his whole life feeling like too much, too big, too heavy, too intense. "You can take up as much space as you want," he said low. "Here, you always have a place." Ada's eyes shone with something that looked like gratitude, mixed with something else, something deeper, more dangerous. They drank the chocolate in comfortable silence. But it was a loaded silence, full of unspoken things, full of questions neither had the courage to ask yet. Lucas went back to work, adjusting the cello strings with almost obsessive precision. Ada sat near him, watching every movement as she always did. But today there was something different. She was closer, not invading his space, but occupying it naturally, as if she'd always belonged there. "Can I help?" she asked suddenly. Lucas looked up, surprised. "Help how?" "I don't know." "Hold something. Hand you a tool, anything." He hesitated. He'd never shared the work with anyone. The workshop had always been his solitary sanctuary. But the idea of Ada beside him, working together, creating something together, was too tempting to refuse. "Okay," he agreed. "Can you hold this stand while I adjust the height?" Ada stood up immediately, eager. Lucas positioned the cello and indicated where she should hold. She placed her hands exactly where he asked. And then it happened. Their hands touched. It wasn't an accidental touch. It was inevitable. Lucas's fingers brushed Ada's as they held the same stand, and the electricity that passed between them was almost visible. Ada caught her breath. Lucas froze, but neither pulled away. "Sorry," he murmured, but didn't move his hand. "You don't need to be," she whispered, and didn't pull away either. They stayed like that for a few seconds, hands almost intertwined, eyes locked on each other, the world around them disappearing. Then Lucas, slowly, very slowly, slid his hand to the side, but in doing so, his thumb brushed the side of her hand. A soft touch, almost imperceptible but completely intentional. Ada closed her eyes for an instant, as if she were feeling it with her entire body. When she opened her eyes, there was something new there. Something that made Lucas's heart beat faster. Desire. The rest of the morning passed in slow motion. Each movement seemed loaded with meaning. Each glance lasted a second longer. Each word was chosen carefully, but what really mattered was what wasn't being said. They worked side by side, adjusting the cello, testing the tuning, polishing the wood. And with each task there was a touch, a brush of arms, a meeting of hands, a closeness that wasn't accidental. Ada passed a cloth over the body of the instrument, and Lucas held the other end. They leaned in to examine a crack, and their shoulders touched. She reached for a tool, and her body brushed his. Each touch was brief, but each one left a mark. When the sun began to set, tinting the workshop with orange tones, Ada noticed there was a loose thread on her sweater. She tried to pull it, but the thread got tangled. "Let me see," Lucas said without thinking. He approached and carefully took the thread between his fingers. Ada stayed completely still, breathing slowly while he worked to untangle it. But to do this, he had to touch her shoulder, slide his fingers over the wool, lightly brush her skin where the sweater's neckline began. Ada closed her eyes. Lucas felt her breathing change, felt her body tense, but not from fear, from anticipation. He released the thread, but didn't step back. They stood there, still, just inches apart. Lucas could feel the warmth of her body, could hear her heart beating, or was it his? Slowly, almost without realizing it, he raised his hand and moved a strand of hair that had fallen over her face. His fingers brushed her cheek, soft, tender, impossible. Ada opened her eyes, and what Lucas saw there made him forget to breathe. There was desire, there was tenderness, there was fear, but above all there was permission. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice trembling. He wanted to kiss her. God, how he wanted to. Wanted to pull her close, feel her lips on his, lose himself in her completely. But the fear came back, fast, brutal. What if she finds out? What if she runs like all the others? He stepped back. "It's getting late," he said, his voice hoarse. "You should go." Ada blinked as if waking from a trance. There was confusion in her eyes, and maybe hurt. "Yes, of course." She grabbed her coat quickly, avoiding looking at him. "See you tomorrow." "See you tomorrow," Lucas repeated. She left, and Lucas stood alone in the workshop, hating himself for stepping back, hating himself for being afraid, hating himself for not being brave enough to accept what she was offering, but at the same time, treasuring each touch like a treasure, because maybe, just maybe, she would come back. And maybe next time he would be brave enough not to let her go. Ada came back the next day, and the next, and the next, but something had changed. The air between them was denser, charged with a tension neither knew how to undo. Each glance lasted too long. Each silence said things words couldn't express. And the touches, God, the touches, were everywhere. A brush of fingers when picking up a tool, a meeting of shoulders when leaning over the cello, a touch on the waist when he passed behind her in a tight space. Each gesture was technically innocent, but loaded with something much bigger. Lucas was losing control. And the worst part was that he knew it. Ada occupied him in ways he didn't understand. When she wasn't there, he thought about her. When she was, he couldn't think about anything else. Her scent, that soft aroma of flowers and vanilla, stayed embedded in the workshop even after she left. Her laugh echoed in his thoughts. Her smile appeared when he closed his eyes. He was falling in love, and that terrified him, because Lucas knew how this story ended. He'd lived this movie before. the approach, the hope, the discovery, the withdrawal, the pain. But with Ada, it felt different. She wasn't afraid of him, didn't look away, didn't pull back when he got close. On the contrary, she leaned in closer. On a Monday afternoon, Ada brought music, not sheet music, but a small portable speaker. She connected her phone and a soft melody began to play, something classical, calm, enveloping. "What are you doing?" Lucas asked, surprised. "Creating atmosphere," Ada replied, smiling as she adjusted the volume. "You work in too much silence. Music helps the soul breathe." Lucas didn't disagree. In fact, he liked it. The music filled the empty spaces, made everything lighter, more intimate. They worked to the sound of the melodies. Ada began to hum along softly, almost without realizing it, and Lucas found himself watching her more than working. The way she bit her lower lip when she was focused, the way her eyes closed when a particularly beautiful note played, the way her body moved gently to the rhythm of the music. She was beautiful, not just physically, though she was. But there was something more, a light that came from within, a tenderness that completely disarmed him. "Lucas?" He blinked, realizing he was staring. "Sorry, You what?" She tilted her head, curious. "Nothing." He quickly looked away, but Ada took a step forward. "No. Tell me." Lucas took a deep breath. The words were stuck in his throat, too heavy to come out. But there was something in her eyes, an openness, an invitation, that made him try. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice low, almost embarrassed. Ada caught her breath. For a moment, it seemed like she was going to say something, but instead she just smiled, a small, vulnerable smile, full of meaning. "Thank you," she whispered, and then, without warning, she moved closer, placed her hand on his arm. Soft, warm, real. "You are too," she said. "Beautiful." Lucas felt his chest tighten. No one had ever said that to him. No one had ever looked at him like that, as if he were something precious. He wanted to believe it, wanted so badly to believe it. But the fear was stronger. He gently pulled away, picking up sandpaper as an excuse to occupy his hands. "The cello is almost ready," he said, changing the subject. "One more week, and you'll be able to play." Ada let her hand fall to her side. There was frustration in her eyes, but also understanding. "Okay," she said softly. "I can wait." But the way she said it, with that double layer of meaning, made Lucas realize she wasn't just talking about the instrument. In the following days, the tension only increased. Ada started wearing clothes that accentuated her curves, not in a scandalous way, but enough for Lucas to notice. A slightly tighter blouse, a slightly shorter skirt, a slightly more revealing neckline. And he noticed. God, how he noticed. He tried not to look, tried to focus on work, but it was impossible. His eyes followed her like a magnet. Every movement of hers was hypnotizing. And Ada knew. She knew the effect she had on him. There was a game happening between them, a subtle dance of approach and retreat. She took a step forward. He pulled back. She touched. He froze. She smiled. He looked away. But each day, the space between them got smaller. On a rainy Thursday, Ada arrived soaked. She'd forgotten her umbrella, and the rain caught her halfway there. "My God," Lucas said, immediately grabbing a towel. "You're drenched." "It's okay," Ada laughed, taking off her wet coat, but her white blouse was transparent, revealing the outline of her bra underneath. Lucas quickly turned his face away, feeling the blood rush up. There's clothes of mine in the back. You can change if you want." Ada hesitated, then smiled. "Okay." She disappeared to the back of the workshop. Lucas stood still, trying to control his breathing, trying not to imagine Ada taking off her wet clothes, changing her blouse, wearing something of his. When she came back, she was wearing a plaid flannel shirt that was huge on her. The sleeves covered her hands. The hem went to mid-thigh. She looked small, vulnerable, and absolutely irresistible. "It's big," she said, laughing. "It's..." Lucas swallowed hard. "It's perfect." They looked at each other, and this time, neither looked away. Ida took a step forward. Lucas didn't step back. She took another step. He stayed where he was, his heart beating erratically. She was so close now that he could feel the warmth of her body, could see the raindrops still caught in her eyelashes, could hear her breathing fast and shallow. "Lucas," she whispered, "why do you pull away from me?" "Because I'm afraid," he admitted, his voice hoarse. "Of me? Of hurting you?" Ada frowned, confused. "You would never hurt me. You don't know that." "I do." She placed her hand on his chest right over his heart. "I know because I see you, and what I see is a gentle man, a good man, a man who's afraid of being who he is." Lucas closed his eyes. Her words hurt. They hurt because they were true. "I'm not what you think," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm different. And when you find out, you'll—" "I'm not going anywhere," Ada interrupted, firm. "No matter what you think you need to tell me, I won't run." She raised her other hand and held his face between her warm palms. "I like you, Lucas, really, and I want to be here, with you." Lucas opened his eyes, and what he saw there, the sincerity, the tenderness, the desire, almost broke him. He leaned his face in, resting his forehead against hers, eyes closed, breaths mingled. "I like you too," he confessed quietly. "More than I should." Ada smiled against his skin. "There's no such thing as more than you should. There's only feeling." And then slowly she leaned in. Lucas felt her lips brush his, soft, tentative, perfect. But before the kiss could really happen, before he could allow himself to feel it completely, he pulled back. I can't," he said, his voice desperate. Ada opened her eyes and there was pain there, but also patience. "It's okay," she whispered. "When you're ready, I'll be here." And then she stepped away, grabbed her bag and left, leaving Lucas alone, trembling, hating himself for not having the courage, but treasuring that almost kiss as the most precious moment of his life. The cello was ready. Lucas held the instrument in his hands, admiring the final work. The wood gleamed under the workshop's soft light, each grain highlighted by the perfectly applied varnish. The cracks had been repaired with such mastery that they seemed never to have existed. The new strings vibrated with perfect tension. The bridge was adjusted to the millimeter. It was a masterpiece. But Lucas didn't feel joy. He felt only a growing emptiness in his chest. Because if the cello was ready, Ada didn't need to come back anymore. And the idea of not seeing her every day, of not hearing her laugh, not feeling her presence, not living through those moments loaded with tension and desire, was unbearable. He ran his fingers over the instrument, as if saying goodbye. "Maybe it's better this way," he thought, "before I ruin everything, before she finds out and runs like all the others." But even thinking that, he knew it was a lie, because Ada wasn't like the others. Ada stayed. Ada came back. Ada saw him. And for the first time in his life, Lucas wanted to be seen. He called her that afternoon. "Ada, it's Lucas. Hi." Her voice sounded cheerful, warm. "Everything okay?" "Yes, I'm finished." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "The cello?" "Yes, it's ready. You can come get it whenever you want." Another silence, longer this time. "How about tomorrow?" Ada asked, and there was something strange in her voice, something Lucas couldn't identify. "But not at the workshop. There's a place I want to show you." Lucas hesitated. "A place? Do you trust me?" He took a deep breath. "I do." "Then meet me tomorrow at 3 in the afternoon at the entrance to Waters Park. And bring the cello." Before he could ask anything, she hung up. Lucas stood there holding the phone, his heart beating fast. She wasn't running away. She was inviting him. Lucas arrived at the park 10 minutes early. He carried the cello carefully, protected inside the restored case. He wore a navy blue dress shirt, the only one he had that wasn't stained with varnish, and dark pants. He'd spent 20 minutes trying to tame his hair, but gave up when he realized he was being ridiculous. Waters Park was one of the most beautiful places in the city. There was a lake in the center, surrounded by old trees and stone paths. It was peaceful, quiet, almost magical. And then he saw her. Ada was sitting on a wooden bench near the lake, wearing a light brown dress that contrasted beautifully with her skin. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves over her shoulders. She was looking at the water, lost in thought. When she noticed his presence, she smiled, and the whole world seemed brighter. "You came," she said, standing up. "Of course I came." She walked to him and, without warning, hugged him. It wasn't a casual hug. It was a tight, lingering hug, full of feeling. Lucas was tense at first, but then relaxed, allowing himself to feel her warmth against his chest. "Thank you," Ada whispered against his shoulder, "for everything." When they pulled apart, there were tears in her eyes. "Come," she said, taking his hand. "I want to show you something." She guided him along a narrow trail that bordered the lake. They walked in silence, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was full of anticipation, of something about to happen. Finally, they arrived at a small wooden overlook that extended over the water. The view was breathtaking, the sun beginning to set, tinting the sky with shades of orange and pink, reflecting on the lake like a mirror. "My grandfather used to bring me here when I was a child," Ada said, her voice soft. "He said this was the place where nature's music played the loudest." Lucas looked around. She was right. There were birds singing, the wind whispering through the leaves, the water gently lapping at the shore. It was perfect. "I want to play here," Ada said, looking at the cello case. "For the first time since he died, I want to play here. With you." Lucas felt his throat tighten. He opened the case carefully, revealing the restored cello. Ada caught her breath. It's perfect," she whispered, running her fingers over the wood with reverence. "It's even more beautiful than I remembered." "It deserved it," Lucas said. "Deserved to live again." Ada raised her eyes to him, and there was something deeply moved in that look. She picked up the instrument, sat on the overlook bench, and positioned the cello between her legs. She picked up the bow, took a deep breath, and began to play. The melody that came out was the Bach suite her grandfather played every night. The notes flowed softly, melancholic, full of longing and love. Ada played with her eyes closed, completely surrendered to the music, and Lucas could see the tears running down her face. But they were tears of healing, of acceptance, of gratitude. When the last note sounded and dissipated in the air, Ada opened her eyes and smiled. "Thank you," she said, looking at Lucas. "You gave me back more than the cello. You gave me back a part of myself I thought I'd lost." Lucas knelt in front of her, getting to eye level with her. "You did the same thing for me," he confessed, his voice hoarse. "You made me believe I could be more than what I thought I was." Ada carefully set the cello aside and held his face between her hands. "Lucas, you're amazing. You're talented, kind, beautiful. You're everything." He closed his eyes, fighting against tears. "You don't know—" "I know," she interrupted, firm. "I know you're carrying something. I know you're afraid, but I don't care because I see you, and what I see, I want." Lucas opened his eyes, and what he saw there, the sincerity, the acceptance, the love, almost destroyed him. He leaned in. Ada leaned in too, faces touching, breaths mingled, his thumb caressing her cheek. "I want to kiss you," Lucas whispered, his voice trembling. "Then kiss me," Ada replied, her lips almost touching his. Lucas closed his eyes, leaned in another centimeter, and then panic overwhelmed him. Like a violent, brutal, devastating wave, all the memories came back at once, all the rejections, all the escapes, all the times he tried and failed. What if she finds out? What if she runs? What if this ends like it always ends? He pulled back abruptly, standing up so fast he almost stumbled. I can't," he said, his voice desperate, his hands shaking. Ada was paralyzed, confused, hurt. "Lucas, I need to go," he interrupted, already walking back down the trail. Sorry. And then he ran like a coward. Ran because fear was bigger than courage. Ran because he believed it was better to pull away now than be abandoned later. Ada was left alone on the overlook, the cello beside her, tears running down her face. But this time, they weren't tears of healing. They were tears of pain. Lucas ran to the workshop and locked the door. He sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, his head in his hands. And for the first time in years, he cried. He cried because he wanted it so badly. Wanted her. Wanted that kiss. Wanted to believe he could be loved. But fear was a prison, and he didn't know how to escape. Outside, night fell, and inside the workshop, Lucas remained alone in the dark, trapped between the desire to live and the fear of trying. 3 days passed. 3 days of silence. 3 days without Ada. Lucas didn't leave the workshop, didn't answer calls, didn't respond to messages, just worked or tried to work. But his hands, normally so precise and steady, trembled. His focus, normally unshakable, was shattered. He couldn't stop thinking about that moment on the overlook. Ada's face so close to his, their lips almost touching, the promise of something beautiful, something real, something he desperately wanted, and he had run, like a coward. The shame consumed him, not just for pulling back, but for the pain he saw in her eyes. Ada had opened up completely, had offered everything, and he had rejected her in the worst possible way. She deserved an explanation. She deserved the truth. But how do you tell the truth when the truth is so humiliating? Lucas spent sleepless nights mentally rehearsing what he would say, but each version sounded pathetic. Each word seemed insufficient. How do you explain that your own body became your greatest prison? How do you say you've been rejected so many times you've lost the courage to try? How do you admit you're so afraid of hurting her that you'd rather hurt yourself first? There were no right words, but he had to try. On the morning of the 4th day, Lucas finally picked up the phone. He typed the message 3 times before hitting send. Ada, please, I need to see you. Need to explain. Can you come to the workshop this afternoon, please? He waited, his heart beating erratically. Minutes passed, then an hour. Finally, the phone vibrated. At 3. Nothing more. Just that. Lucas took a deep breath. It was more than he deserved. Ada arrived promptly at 3 in the afternoon. Lucas saw her through the window before she rang the bell. She wore a grey coat buttoned up to her neck, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her face was serious, her eyes tired. She didn't smile when she saw him. Lucas opened the door before she could ring the bell. "Hi," he said, his voice hoarse. "Hi." They stood there at the threshold, heavy silence between them. "Come in, please," Lucas asked, stepping aside. Ada hesitated, but then entered. She didn't take off her coat, didn't sit down, just stood in the middle of the workshop, arms crossed, waiting. Lucas closed the door and turned to her. The words he'd rehearsed completely disappeared. All that remained was the raw, naked, painful truth. "I'm sorry," he began, his voice breaking on the very first word. "For what I did, for running, for hurting you." Ada said nothing, just waited. Lucas took a deep breath, gathering all the courage he had. "I need to tell you something that I've never told anyone, not like this." He paused, trying to find the right words, but there were no right words. There was only the truth. Since I was a teenager, I've always been different, physically. My body is disproportionate, in a way that scares people. That hurts. Ada frowned, confused. Lucas continued, the words now coming out in a desperate flow. "Every time I tried to get involved with someone, every time I thought maybe I could be normal, the same thing happened. They saw and ran, or they tried and couldn't. And the pain I caused without meaning to." His voice failed. He closed his eyes, fighting against tears. "I convinced myself I was cursed, that my body was a punishment, that I was destined to be alone because I'm too big, because I'm too much." He opened his eyes and looked directly at Ada. "And then you appeared, and you were kind, and beautiful, and perfect. And I wanted so badly to believe I could have this, that I could have you. But when the moment came, when we were there, so close, the fear came back. The fear that you'd find out and run. The fear that I'd hurt you. The fear that you'd look at me with disgust or pity." The tears finally fell. "I ran because I'm afraid, Ada. Afraid of losing you. Afraid of hurting you. Afraid that you'll see the monster I think I am." Lucas let his head fall, unable to hold her gaze any longer. The silence that followed was deafening. And then Ada moved. She walked to him slowly, each step measured, deliberate. She stopped right in front of him. And then, with a tenderness that completely broke Lucas, She placed her hand under his chin and lifted his face, forcing him to look at her. There were tears in her eyes too. "Lucas," she said, her voice firm but full of emotion, "you're not a monster. You never were." "But I—" "No," she interrupted. "Let me talk now." Lucas closed his mouth, trembling. Ada held his face between both hands, forcing him to maintain eye contact. "Bodies don't define us," she said, each word loaded with conviction. "Not mine, not yours. What defines us is how we treat people, how we love, how we care. And Lucas, you're the kindest person I've ever met. But you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Ada said, firm. "You think your body is a problem, but you know what I see when I look at you. I see a man who touches wood like it's sacred, who fixes broken things with reverence, who looks at me like I'm precious, who's so afraid of hurting me that he'd rather hurt himself first." She wiped the tears from his face with her thumbs. "You're not too big, Lucas. The world was too small. The people who judged you, who hurt you, they didn't deserve you." "And you?" Lucas asked, his voice desperate. "Do you think you deserve me?" Ada smiled through her tears. "No, I don't deserve you, but I want you. I want you. All of you, exactly as you are." Lucas let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You don't know what you're getting into." "Then show me," Ada challenged, her eyes shining with determination. "Stop deciding for me. Stop being afraid for me. Let me choose, and I choose you." Lucas looked at her, really looked, and saw the truth there. There was no pity, no fear, just acceptance, just love. "I'm so afraid," he confessed quietly. "I know," Ada whispered, "but you don't have to be afraid alone. Let me be afraid with you. Let's figure this out together." She leaned in, resting her forehead against his. "I'm not going to run, Lucas. No matter what you think you need to tell me, no matter what you think you are, I'm not going anywhere." Lucas closed his eyes, finally allowing himself to believe. To believe that maybe, just maybe, he could be loved, that maybe he wasn't too much, that maybe finally he'd found someone big enough to love all the parts of him. "I want you too," he whispered against her forehead. "More than anything." Ada smiled. "Then stop running." And this time Lucas didn't run. This time he stayed. They stood there, embraced in the middle of the workshop, crying together, healing together, finally allowing themselves to be vulnerable. And when they finally pulled apart, Ada took his hand, that huge, calloused hand that he always thought was too big, and intertwined her fingers with his. "Let's take it slow," she said softly. "In our own time. No rush. No fear." Lucas nodded, unable to speak, because for the first time in his life he wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something beautiful. 2 weeks had passed since Lucas's confession, 2 weeks of rebuilding, of healing, of learning to trust again. Ada continued visiting the workshop every day. But now it was different. There was no more unresolved tension between them. No more secrets too heavy to carry. There was just presence, company, growing affection. They talked more, laughed more, touched more, but always carefully, always with respect for each other's fears. Ada held his hand while they read together. Lucas put his arm around her shoulders when they watched the sunset through the workshop window. She rested her head on his shoulder. He kissed the top of her head. Small gestures, but each one was a promise. "I'm here. I won't run. You're safe with me." Lucas felt the fear diminish each day. It didn't disappear completely. Maybe it never would. But Ada was right. It was easier to be afraid when you weren't alone. And then, on a Friday night, Ada made an invitation. "Want to come to dinner at my place tomorrow?" she asked casually, while putting away the books she'd brought. Lucas looked up, surprised. "At your place?" "Yeah, I thought that... Well, we've known each other for a while now, and I wanted to cook for you. Return all the coffees we've shared here." She smiled, but there was something more in that invitation. Something they both understood without needing to say it. Lucas felt his heart race. "I'd love to," he said, his voice hoarse. "Great." Ada approached and kissed his cheek, a gesture that had become common, but still made his heart jump. 7 o'clock? 7 o'clock. Lucas spent all Saturday nervous. He showered twice, changed clothes 3 times, obsessively combed his hair, bought flowers from a small market near the workshop, a simple bouquet of white daisies, because Ada had once mentioned they were her favorite. When he arrived at her apartment at 7 sharp, he was trembling, not from fear, but from anticipation. Ada opened the door wearing a simple wine-colored dress that gently hugged her curves. Her hair was down, falling in waves over her shoulders. She wore subtle lipstick that highlighted her smile. She was stunning. "Hi," she said, her eyes shining when she saw him. "Hi." Lucas held out the flowers, a bit awkwardly. "I brought these for you." Ada caught her breath, touched. "Daisies. You remembered." "Of course I remembered." She took the flowers and, without thinking, leaned in and kissed his lips. Quick, soft, almost reflexive. Both froze. It was their first kiss. Brief, but real. Ada pulled back, blushing. "Sorry, No," Lucas interrupted, smiling. "Don't apologize. It was perfect." She smiled back, relieved. "Come in, the food is almost ready." Ada's apartment was small but cozy. There were plants everywhere, books stacked in corners, sheet music scattered on a digital piano in the corner of the living room. The walls were decorated with old photographs, some of her grandfather, others of landscapes. It smelled of garlic, herbs, and wine. "I made homemade pasta," Ada explained, guiding him to the kitchen. "Nothing too fancy, but I hope you like it. I'm sure I'll love it." They ate dinner by candlelight. They talked about everything and nothing, music, childhood dreams, plans. Ada talked about wanting to teach cello to children. Lucas confessed he'd always wanted to build an instrument from scratch, but never had the courage to try. "You should," Ada encouraged. "You have the gift." "Maybe," Lucas said, looking at her. "If you help me. Always." After dinner, they moved to the living room. Ada put soft music playing quietly on the digital piano. They sat on the couch, close but not touching, until Ada leaned in and rested her head on his shoulder. Lucas put his arm around her, pulling her closer. They stayed like that for a while, just listening to the music, feeling each other's presence. And then Ada lifted her face. Lucas looked down. Their eyes met. And this time, when she leaned in, Lucas didn't run. He leaned in too. And finally, they kissed. It was soft at first. Tentative, lips brushing lips, exploring, discovering. But then something changed. The kiss became deeper, more intense. Ada's hands moved up Lucas's chest, intertwining behind his neck. His hands wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer. They lost themselves in each other. When they finally separated, both were breathless. "Lucas," Ada whispered, her eyes dark with desire. "I want you." Lucas felt his blood boil. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Because if we start, I don't know if I'll be able to stop, and I'm afraid of—" Ada placed her fingers over his lips, silencing him. "I'm sure. I want you. All of you. And we'll take it slow. Together." Lucas closed his eyes, letting the reality of that moment sink in. She wanted him, really wanted him. He opened his eyes and nodded. Ada stood up, extending her hand. "Come." She guided him to the bedroom. The light was soft, coming from a small lamp in the corner. The bed was covered with clean white sheets. There was a soft scent of lavender in the air. Ada turned to him, nervous but determined. Lucas pulled her close, holding her face between his hands. "If at any moment you want to stop, we stop. Understood?" "Understood," she whispered. "Same goes for you." He smiled tenderly. "Deal." And then they kissed again. This time, without hurry, without fear, just feeling. Lucas's hands slid down Ada's back, finding the zipper of her dress. He hesitated. "You can," she whispered against his lips. Slowly he opened the zipper. The dress slipped off her shoulders, falling softly to the floor. Ada stood there, vulnerable, beautiful, confident. Lucas caught his breath. "You're beautiful," he said. His voice choked. "So are you," she replied, starting to unbutton his shirt. Button by button, she undressed him. And when the shirt fell, she ran her hands over his chest, exploring, admiring. "Perfect," she murmured. Lucas felt his eyes burn. No one had ever called him perfect. He lifted her in his arms easily, laying her gently on the bed. He lay beside her, their bodies touching, skin against skin. "Ada," he whispered, his voice trembling. I've never had something like this. Something real." "Me neither," she confessed, "but we'll figure it out, together." And then, slowly, with infinite tenderness, they gave themselves to each other. Lucas kissed her everywhere, her neck, her shoulders, the curve of her waist. Ada arched her body against his, whispering his name like a prayer. When they finally joined, it was with care, with love, with respect. There was a moment of hesitation, of adjustment, but Ada guided him, whispering words of encouragement. Slowly, like that. Perfect. And Lucas obeyed, moving with a gentleness that contrasted with his size. They found a rhythm, a balance, a dance that was theirs alone. And when they reached the peak together, it was with foreheads touching, eyes locked, hands intertwined. Afterward, they stayed embraced, breathing still accelerated, bodies still intertwined. Ada rested her forehead on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I love you," she whispered. Lucas felt the tears fall. "I love you too," he replied, his voice broken with emotion. "So much." They fell asleep like that, intertwined, complete. Finally home. The following months were the happiest of Lucas's life. The workshop, which had once been a solitary sanctuary, transformed into something completely different. Now it was a shared home, a space where two souls met daily, not out of obligation, but by choice, by desire, by love. Ada didn't just visit anymore, she inhabited that place. Her things began to appear naturally in the corners. A scarf hanging on the back of a chair, a favorite mug stored in the small cabinet of the makeshift kitchen in the back, sheet music stacked beside Lucas's tools, a pair of soft slippers left by the door. Lucas never asked her to bring anything, but each object that appeared made him smile, because it meant permanence. It meant she was staying, that this was real, and Ada also changed the space in invisible ways. She opened the windows every morning, letting fresh air circulate. She placed wildflowers in improvised glass jars. She read aloud while Lucas worked, filling the silence with poetry and stories. The workshop no longer smelled only of wood and varnish. Now it had her scent too, flowers and vanilla mixed with sawdust and glue. It was perfect. On a Tuesday morning, Ada arrived carrying a small suitcase. Lucas looked up, curious. "Going somewhere?" he asked, trying to hide the pang of sadness in his voice. Ada smiled, mischievous. "No, but I thought that, if you don't mind, I could leave some clothes here, for when I stay late, or when, well, you understand." Lucas felt his heart race. "You want to leave clothes here? If it's not a bother." He stood up, walked to her, and pulled her into a tight hug. "It would never be a bother," he murmured against her hair. "You can leave whatever you want. You can stay as long as you want." Ada pulled back slightly, looking into his eyes. "And if I want to stay always?" Lucas caught his breath. "Are you saying that?" "I'm saying that maybe I want to live here, with you if you want." Lucas couldn't speak, so he just kissed her, deep, lingering, full of meaning. When they separated, he rested his forehead against hers. "I want that," he whispered, "more than anything." And so, without ceremony, without grand declarations, Ada moved in. Their routine established itself naturally. Ada woke up early, made coffee, and woke Lucas with soft kisses on his neck. They had coffee together at the small kitchen table, planning the day, sharing dreams and plans. Then, while Lucas worked on some instrument, Ada practiced cello. The sound filled the workshop, transforming Lucas's work into something almost magical. He sanded wood to the rhythm of her melodies. He adjusted strings following the notes she played. It was as if they were finally creating a symphony together. In the afternoon, Ada often went out to give private music lessons, but she always came back before nightfall, bringing something for dinner. sometimes ingredients to cook together, other times ready-made food when they were too tired. And the nights were theirs. On a Thursday, Ada suggested that Lucas teach her to identify types of wood. "I want to understand what you see," she explained. "I want to know your world better." Lucas was touched. No one had ever truly been interested in his work this way. He guided her to the stacks of boards organized by type and age. "This here is oak," he said, picking up a board and placing it in her hand. "Feel the weight? It's dense, strong, perfect for structures that need to withstand tension." Ada ran her fingers over the surface, concentrated. "And this one?" she asked, pointing to another. "Mahogany. Lighter but still resistant. Has a warmer tone when used in string instruments." He took her hand and guided it over the wood, showing the grain, the texture, the small imperfections that told stories. "Each wood has a personality," Lucas explained, his voice soft. "You just need to learn to listen." Ada looked at him, her eyes shining with admiration. "You talk about them like they're alive, because they are, in a way." She leaned in and kissed him. A soft kiss, full of tenderness. "So you're amazing, you know that?" Lucas smiled, still not completely used to her compliments. "Now it's my turn," Ada said. "I'm going to teach you something." "What?" "To dance." Lucas stepped back, laughing nervously. "I don't know how to dance. That's exactly why I'm going to teach you." Ada grabbed her phone and put on slow music. She extended her hand. "Trust me?" Lucas hesitated, but then took her hand. "Always." Ada guided him, showing the basic steps. At first, Lucas was clumsy, stepping on his own feet, too tense to relax. But Ada was patient, laughing when he made mistakes, encouraging when he got it right. And gradually, Lucas began to understand the rhythm. They danced barefoot in the workshop, among tools and wood, laughing when they bumped into something, kissing in the intervals. "See?" Ada said, resting her head on his chest as they moved slowly. "You just needed a good teacher." "Or a good partner," Lucas corrected, kissing the top of her head. The weeks turned into months, and with time, Lucas's fears began to disappear. Not completely, maybe they never would completely, but Ada was always there, reminding him that he was loved, that he was accepted, that he wasn't too much, and the desire between them never diminished. On the contrary, the more they knew each other, the more they desired each other. A look across the workshop was enough to make the blood boil. Her casual touch on the waist when passing could turn into a deep kiss against the wall. A word whispered in the ear was an irresistible invitation. They made love frequently, sometimes soft and slow, other times intense and urgent, but always with connection, always with love. On a Saturday night, after making love slowly under the soft light of candles, Ada lay on Lucas's chest, tracing invisible patterns on his skin with her fingers. "Are you happy?" she asked quietly. Lucas ran his fingers through her hair, thoughtful. "I didn't even know happiness could be like this," he confessed. "I thought happiness was something distant, unattainable. But with you, it's simple. It's waking up beside you. It's hearing you play. It's dancing with you in the kitchen. It's this." Ada raised her face, her eyes shining. "I'm happy too, more than I ever thought I'd be." They kissed, soft, tender, promising everything without saying anything. And so life continued. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The workshop stopped being just Lucas's workplace. It became their home, the place where they built a life together, where they created memories, where they loved without fear. Lucas finally began working on the project he'd always dreamed of, building a cello from scratch, and Ada was beside him at every step, offering opinions, holding tools, encouraging when he doubted. "It's going to be beautiful," she always said, "because you're putting love into every piece." And Lucas believed it, because finally, after so many years, he had found something that all the other women could never give him: acceptance, love, home, and that was more than enough. It was everything. The cello was almost ready. Not Ada's grandfather's, that one had been restored months ago, and now rested on a special stand in the corner of the workshop, played by her almost every day. This one was different. This was the cello Lucas was building from scratch. Each piece had been chosen with obsessive care. Maple wood for the back and sides, selected for perfect resonance. Spruce for the top, with grain so regular it seemed hand-drawn. Ebony for the fingerboard, polished until it shone like dark glass. Lucas had spent 6 months working on it. 6 months carving, sanding, gluing, adjusting. And Ada had been beside him at every step, not just watching but participating. Holding pieces, offering opinions, encouraging when frustration threatened to defeat him. It was more than an instrument. It was proof that Lucas finally believed in himself, that he was no longer afraid to create something beautiful, that he could leave his mark on the world. And now, on a golden autumn afternoon, only the final adjustment remained. Lucas positioned the bridge with millimetric precision, testing the height, checking the angle. Ada was sitting near the window reading, but occasionally looked up to watch him work. There was something deeply satisfying about that shared silence. They didn't need to fill every moment with words. Each other's presence was enough. "Done," Lucas said finally, stepping back to admire the work. Ada immediately closed the book and approached. The cello was stunning. The wood gleamed under the soft afternoon light, every curve perfect, every detail impeccable. It was a work of art. "Lucas," Ada whispered, running reverent fingers over the surface, "it's perfect." He smiled, a shy but genuine smile. "Want to test it?" he asked, holding out the bow to her. Ada caught her breath. "Really?" "Of course. It was made to be played." With almost religious care, Ada took the cello and sat down. She positioned the instrument between her legs, adjusted the bow, took a deep breath, and played. The first note that came out was so pure, so clear, that both froze. Ada continued, letting the melody flow. The same Bach suite her grandfather played, the same one she'd played that first day on the lake overlook. But this time, it was different. This time, there was no sadness, only beauty, only life. When the last note dissipated in the air, Ada had tears in her eyes. "It's the most beautiful sound I've ever heard," she said. Her voice choked. Lucas knelt in front of her, holding her face between his hands. "Because it was made with love, for you." Ada blinked, confused. "For me?" "For you," Lucas confirmed. "Every piece, every adjustment, every detail. I thought of you the whole time, because you gave me something I thought I'd never have. You gave me the courage to create again, to believe again, to live again." Ada's tears fell freely now. "Lucas, I spent so long thinking I was too big for this world," he continued, his voice breaking. "That I didn't fit anywhere, that I was destined to be alone. But then you appeared, and you showed me that the problem was never that I was too big. The problem was that the world around me was too small." He wiped the tears from her face with his thumbs. "You made me realize I don't need to make myself smaller, don't need to hide. I can be exactly who I am, and still be loved." Ada sobbed, holding his wrists. "You always deserved to be loved, Lucas. Always." "I know that now," he whispered. "Because of you." They stayed like that for a moment, foreheads touching, breaths mingled, hearts beating in the same rhythm. Then Lucas pulled back slightly, reaching into his pocket. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice nervous. Ada frowned, curious. Lucas pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. He opened it slowly, revealing a simple silver ring with a small, delicate stone in the center. Ada caught her breath. "Lucas, I know it might be early," he said quickly, the words tumbling over each other. "And I know I still have my fears, my insecurities. But Ada, you made me believe in futures, in tomorrows, in possibilities. And I don't want to live a single day of those futures without you." He took her hand, trembling. "So I'm asking, do you want to build a life with me? Officially? Forever?" Ada couldn't answer. The tears were too many, the emotion too great. So she just nodded frantically, smiling through the tears. "Yes," she finally managed to say. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes." Lucas slid the ring onto her finger and then pulled her into a tight hug, lifting her off the ground and spinning with her in the workshop. They laughed, cried, kissed, completely lost in each other. When they finally stopped, still embraced, Ada rested her forehead on his chest. "You know what this means, right?" she said, her voice muffled by the fabric of his shirt. "What?" "It means now you're going to have to put up with me forever. My mess, my books scattered everywhere, my music playing at dawn." Lucas laughed, a genuine laugh, full of joy. "I wouldn't have it any other way." That night, they sat together on the small sofa in the back of the workshop, wrapped in a blanket, drinking cheap wine and planning the future. "We can have the ceremony here," Ada suggested, looking around. "In the workshop, where it all began." "That would be perfect," Lucas agreed. "And I want you to build more instruments, to sell, to donate, to leave your mark on the world. Only if you promise to play each one first." "I promise." They fell silent for a moment, just appreciating each other's presence. Then Lucas spoke quietly. "You know, I used to think my body was a curse, that I was too big, too intense, too much in everything." Ada looked at him, waiting. "But now I understand," he continued. "I wasn't too big. I just needed to find someone big enough to love me completely. And you are. You always have been." Ada smiled, her eyes shining. "And you taught me that I don't need to be small either, that I can take up space, that I can be big too." She softly kissed his shoulder. "Now we're big together, Lucas, in every way." Lucas pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "Big together," he repeated. "I like that." And there, in the workshop that had stopped being a solitary refuge to become a shared home, Lucas finally understood what he'd always been searching for. It wasn't acceptance despite who he was. It was acceptance because of who he was. And that made all the difference. He didn't need to hide anymore, didn't need to be afraid anymore, didn't need to carry the shame alone anymore. Because Ada was there, and she wasn't going anywhere. And for the first time in his entire life, Lucas felt complete. Not despite his size, not despite his past, not despite his fears, but simply because he'd finally found someone whose love was big enough to embrace all the parts of him. And that, he realized, was what redemption really meant. Not changing who you are, but finding someone who loves exactly who you are and building something beautiful from that. Lucas spent his entire life believing he was too big to be loved, that his body was a prison, a curse, an impossible burden to carry. He hid behind walls of wood and silence, convinced that loneliness was his destiny. But then Ada arrived, and with her, she brought something he never imagined possible: acceptance. Not despite who he was, but exactly because of who he was. She didn't try to change him, she just loved him. And in that love, Lucas discovered that the problem was never being too big. The problem was that the world around him had always been too small, until he found someone whose heart was vast enough to embrace him completely. And maybe that's the truth we all need to learn, that we're not too much. We just haven't yet found someone big enough to love us completely. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Comment where you're listening from. And if you felt it was really worth it, consider becoming a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt this story was really worth listening to, also click the Super Thanks button. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us continue creating stories that touch the soul.